this anonymous person emailed my supervisor, the president of my university, and a bunch of local news stations and was like, this person in your lab or in your university is spreading misinformation. Like, they need to be kicked out of the PhD program immediately. This person tried to
Wow.
destroy my life.
This is Real Perspective, and I'm your host, Eli Yetter Bowman. On this show, I interview various professional storytellers, often in the documentary space like myself, and we explore the craft of storytelling. Guests share their honest perspectives, from past mistakes to tips for succeeding and other genuine insights on how we can make a living creatively. This show includes no advertisers to keep things more authentic. If you want to support us, help us out, we do offer a variety of consulting services for filmmakers, storytellers, businesses, and other groups, on top of producing documentaries. Shoot us a message at etherealfilms.org if you want to learn more. And now, it's time for the show. Today's guest is Ben, a former Stanford neuroscientist who transitioned to full-time science communication through social media short videos. We met as colleagues in a cohort for excellent science communicators by the National Academies. We discuss his complex decision to transition into science communication. Well, Ben, it's great to have you on. Appreciate you making the time. The purpose of this podcast is to do a deep dive into storytelling. We want to examine the craft, the profession, so like how you make a living. You're an interesting case because it kind of seems like you have two jobs. Talk a little bit about theory and then to provide some practical advice. So I would like to give you a chance to just self-introduce. Take it away.
Sure. Yeah. Well, first off, thank you for considering me a storyteller because that is a challenge that I kind of struggle with. I've had to commit a lot of effort to trying to figure out storytelling. Being a scientist by training, you don't get that immediately. It's been a fun adventure. So honored to be here. And with that said, I am a scientist by training, did a PhD in neuroscience and then what's called a postdoc, which is the equivalent of a residency, but the science equivalent. Did that at Stanford, studying empathy and how the drug MDMA enhances empathy in the brain. And all the way along as I was doing that, I started posting videos on social media, just explaining neuroscience stuff. I actually got into the space of doing this by happenstance. I posted a video on TikTok and it just went super viral. Got 1.6 million views. People started asking me questions about science and I was like, well, this actually feels impactful. And so I started posting more and more regularly and turned into a part-time, what I would call science communicator, where as I was working in the lab, I was also posting these videos on social media and doing podcasts and talks and partnerships and advising and stuff like that. And I really started to fall in love with it. And then I got to a point where I realized that I was making more impact through social media and TikTok than my research at Stanford, which was a very, very unexpected, unforeseen twist in my life. I thought for a very long time that I would be a professor, and then decided with that revelation that I was going to go full-time into science communication. And so now I'm the chief science officer of a foundation. We fund early career scientists that demonstrate excellence in science communication. That's called the Mind Science Foundation. I'm also writing a book that is going to be coming out next year. I'm planning to do some teaching of science communication at Stanford starting in the spring. I do a bunch of advising, I do a bunch of consulting, and then I also run the social media accounts and do partnerships through that. So I'm kind of like entrepreneur, almost science communicator in a sense. And I have a bunch of projects going on. I still publish papers. I don't do bench research anymore, but I still have tendrils in academia where I'm participating in and leading research projects. So I've kind of shifted my attention away from scientific research and more to scientific communication.
I love how you just naturally folded us into the next topic, which is how you got started. I have a lot of questions because you just covered a lot of ground. So let's just take them one at a time. Can you place me in time? How long ago was this that you posted this video, which was not intended to become a viral sensation, but then did?
That was April 2020. And the video was how to wear a mask. To just give more background here, I was doing research. I was a PhD student. I would do surgeries and biochemistry, all sorts of stuff in the lab that I would wear a mask. And then I went to Walmart at the beginning of the pandemic and nobody knew how to wear a mask. And I was like, interesting. I possess this unique piece of knowledge that most people don't have, but everybody needs right now. And so I was like, let me film a video for my friends and family. And it's still up on TikTok. You can find it. It's like me just awkwardly sitting there, like one take, talking to the camera, like, hi, everyone. I just went to Walmart. And you can tell, like, I'm not talking to TikTok. I'm talking to my friends and family. And I feel uncomfortable being on camera. I had no picture. I had no name. It was just like user and a string of numbers. And it just went viral. And I think part of what happened was because of how natural my presentation was, because I wasn't speaking to TikTok, I was speaking to my friends and family. I think that stuck out
Right.
on TikTok, and it was a useful piece of information. And I think it just caught people's attention. It was like, who's this awkward dude sitting here talking to us like we're his friends? But it was great.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's funny because it's almost like one of those fictitious scenarios of like just simply post one video and you'll go viral and then the rest of it just will come easy. And I'm sure the rest of it didn't just immediately come easy. I mean, maybe it did, but there was probably more to it than that.
No, I wouldn't say it came easy. Yeah.
Good, because this would have been a much more depressing podcast, I would say otherwise, because all the other storytellers who listen are going to be like, what the fuck? I should have just made a TikTok video. That's it.
Yeah, I never faced any adversity whatsoever or challenge. It was tough. I mean, the initial challenge was, holy shit, like, do I want to be posting on TikTok as a scientist? Because I was in a stage of my career where I was pushing through my PhD, and I came from a background of academic adversity, where when I applied to college, I got into none of the schools that I applied to, only got into my very lowest fallback, and I was like crushed. And then I went to college, I worked my ass off trying to recover from that failure, got a 4.0, graduated in 3 years, did a bunch of research, applied to PhD programs, was like, now it's my time to shine. Once again, got rejected by every school except for my lowest fallback. And so now I was in my PhD and was like, I gotta fix this. Like, I screwed up so much in high school with bad grades that I've been working on this for years trying to recover. And so I was in the middle of my PhD and I was doing really well. I was publishing papers, I was doing everything right. And I thought, I cannot afford a setback. And I don't know what TikTok might do to my career. Being this young student on TikTok could be destructive for my entire life. But at the same time, I really, truly felt the impact of reaching 1.6 million people with potentially life-saving information, or could have protected their loved ones from getting sick, people at the store from getting sick. And so I was like in this weird conundrum of, do I do this or not? And I decided to go for it purely because of the impact of the education. I thought, if I could reach 1.6 million people with this, what could I do if I commit to this? And now here I am, 100 million views later, all scientific education. Super glad that I took that path and made that decision. But then, of course, like I said, it wasn't always easy. It wasn't like the next video I posted got 1 million views. It did not. I had to learn, and I had no scientific communications training. I had like a slight sense of what people thought was interesting. And so one of the next videos I made was, why is your brain wrinkly? Well, let's talk about surface area. And I crumpled a ball of paper and was like, look at how much bigger this is than this round ping pong ball that's flat. And, those videos didn't go viral. They got a couple thousand views. But I mean, I've been doing this for 4.5 years. This was April 2020. And just iterating and figuring out what people like. How do I present myself? I butted up against controversial topics. I talked about climate change. I mean, masks became very controversial. That's the thing I originally started with. I've had many dramatic and traumatic failures of people attacking me and doxing me. And it has not been a smooth journey at all. But the thing that continues pushing me forward through it is truly the impact. And especially with where society has gone in the last 4 years in the United States, starting with COVID and the sort of anti-science, anti-medicine rhetoric that has come out of that, and the distrust and political polarization and politicalization of science and medicine, it just feels more and more important to be on the internet talking about science in a positive, relatable, accepting way that lets anyone in and doesn't speak in a condescending way that's the ivory tower, you're not allowed in. Like, let's democratize science and get it out to everyone. And so I'm glad that I have had the success that I've had and that the challenges that I have faced didn't stop my progress.
Yeah. Wow. Man, you cover so much good ground. This is great. Well, I want to go back first to something that I can really relate to, I can really empathize with, which was similarly, I recall having a lot of challenges in my high school career. I was dealing with a lot of health stuff in my family, and just I had a very self-destructive shift in my mentality. I went from being a straight-A student to just not giving a shit about school. And, one of the things that happens when you don't give a shit in high school is ultimately you are the one that suffers from those consequences. And so I feel for you. I had a period in high school where I fucked off and I didn't work as hard as I could have, and have spent a lot of my professional career trying to pick up the pieces of, actually, wait, no, I think I can be a really competent person, and working really hard to get into the school that I wanted to, which was incredibly difficult and took a long time. So I think that's really helpful to share that, because one, I think this is a pretty common experience of we make mistakes and then we're fearing that we're being haunted forever. But this redemption arc is really powerful, because also I would imagine you work pretty hard now because of all that you've continuously worked hard, because you were like, yeah, I saw what happened when I didn't get off to a great start at some point, and that shit adds up. It becomes cumulative, and it becomes something that, for me, the doubt can still come back later at any point. It doesn't matter how many accolades, doesn't matter how much money you're earning, what the successes are. At least for me, I feel there is still a recurrence of like, yeah, but am I still my mistakes? Am I still my regrets?
Absolutely.
So I appreciate you bringing that up early. I want to bring up major challenges because I think it's important.
Yeah, and I want to add two
Yeah.
things, two take home notes on that. One, for any young people listening, apply yourself. The decisions you make early impact your long-term trajectory. And I never thought in high school that me screwing around and not studying for a test would influence the PhD programs I got in later on. And of course, it didn't directly impact it, but it did indirectly because it influenced the school I went to for undergrad. And yeah, like you said,
Yep.
the decisions compound. So it's important to recognize that as early as you can. Now, the second thing, though, I'm
Mm-hmm.
sure there may be people who listened to me explain that and thought, what happened? You decided to become the TikTok guy. Did it derail your career? I just want to follow up on that thread and say, no, it did not. I did end up outworking the bet I had laid for myself, essentially. And so finishing up my PhD, I had been working so hard, like you said, to compensate that I ended up publishing 15 papers, and I had offers from Yale, Stanford, MIT, Duke, Johns Hopkins. Like I could have gone anywhere. But just all that to say that, one, even if you do screw up early like I did, I do believe that the universe invites opportunities for recovery. And second, that when I went on TikTok, I I think overall it had a neutral impact on my scientific career. It definitely
Mm-hmm.
didn't get in my way. And I was surprised that when I learned that my academic peers knew about it, they were
Mm-hmm.
supportive and positive. And I remember the chair of my department, I was doing my PhD in the Department of Physiology and Biophysics, and the chair called me into his office and was like, "Hey, I saw your TikTok." And I was like, "Oh no, shit, this is it. Like, I'm about to get the boot." And he was like, "I think it's amazing what you're doing. Like, it's really fantastic. We need more of this. Just a word of caution, don't film inside the laboratory or any research
Mm-hmm.
animals or anything like that." But he was super supportive, and all of my peers were, and it was just very strange. I was not expecting that response, but it helped me a lot with networking in my field. I've met a lot of people online, and it also, honestly, I think it has helped with publicizing my research. When I post a video about my own research, my scientific peer-reviewed papers full of jargon, which nobody understands, get thousands of downloads. And that's incredible because scientific research and literature is generally not a public resource. People cannot access in many cases these files. And even when they do,
Yep.
you can't interpret it. Whether that has translated
Mm-hmm.
to more citations in my papers, I have no idea, but it has definitely served as a way for me to talk about my research and educate the public in a way that they otherwise wouldn't be able to engage with this new developments in science. And of course, I also talk about other science that's happening, and mostly I talk about other people's science.
Yeah. Well, and I love that you're bringing out how this has, rather than being distracting from the academic currency, which of course the academic currency is historically how much you publish, how many citations, and what journal you're publishing in. And I think old school academics might hear your story and stop there and be like, well, that's just, how can you focus on that? But you're clearly showing that it's, rather than distracting from that currency, it's additive, right? It's actually creating potentially more folks reading papers, because it's true, right? You can publish amazing findings and like 100 people have read it in like a year, and it's just, is that really impact? And so I love how this decision of, do I lean into this potential viral sensation that I've just hit upon and lean more into social media and how mass communication is in this day and age, and how it's added dimensionality to you as a profession. And obviously it shifted your career tremendously. You mentioned that some of the setbacks that you've experienced were, you said folks attacking you, you said doxing. Can you share maybe some of those experiences?
Yeah, so first off, the internet is a gruesome place. And I've only found that that really comes with scale. My first year or 6 months on TikTok, everybody was really friendly. Even that first video that went viral, people were like really supportive and like, "Thank you so much, I'm sharing this." Really, really nice and supportive. And then as my videos grew and gained more publicity, I just discovered that essentially you can say anything on the internet and there are people who disagree with you. Literally anything.
Yep.
I've also made mistakes early on, and by the way, this is like very sensitive for me to talk about, but I want to share it. I talk about it often because it's so important. When I first started posting on social media, on TikTok, a brand approached me about doing a sponsorship for this SDS free shampoo. SDS is just a detergent that they put in shampoo. It's usually the number one ingredient. It breaks down proteins, it breaks apart bonds and stuff, and so it's supposed to help get dirt and grime off of your hair. But it's an irritant for a lot of people.
Mm.
And what's really interesting to me is that when I would go in the lab, we would collect brain tissue and then we would homogenize it. We're basically blending it. We're trying to like break it down, get all the proteins apart, because then we're going to quantify the protein levels and all this stuff. And so when we would homogenize it, we would basically put it in like this mini tiny blender essentially, but we would put it in there with a 1% SDS solution, the same detergent that they put in shampoo.
Yeah.
And so we had this huge bucket of SDS in the lab, and I thought it was so funny that this same thing that we're literally using at 1% to break down brain tissue is the number one ingredient in shampoos. No wonder it's a skin irritant.
Yes.
And so I thought I'd make that the focus of my video, showing me in the lab with like the SDS and being like, this is also in the shampoos, and like it irritates people's heads. So like if it does irritate your head, here's a shampoo that doesn't have it. And the video, so I made two huge mistakes. One, looking back on it after, I could see how the video came off as an attempt at fear mongering. It wasn't at all. I didn't realize when I was putting it together that the sentiment I was sharing was like, this breaks down people's brains. I didn't say it like that at all, but you could interpret it that way.
Yeah.
And so people were like, this is fear mongering, like this is crazy. And the other mistake that I made was that it was my first time I ever did an ad. And so I forgot to include disclosures. Huge, huge mistake. Never ever have done that again. And then what happened incredibly in a bad way actually, was that the video started going viral and that people started ordering the shampoo, and the responses got worse and worse and worse, where people were like, this is fear mongering, this is an untagged ad, all this stuff. And I was just panicking and didn't know what to do. And then the situation exploded because this anonymous person emailed my supervisor, like my lab director, the president of my university, and a bunch of local news stations, and was like, this person in your lab or in your university is spreading misinformation. Like, they need to be kicked out of the PhD program immediately. This person tried to destroy my life over this. It wasn't even about the fact that I had forgotten to put hashtag ad, which by the way, at that time, and I think still, TikTok did not allow you to edit captions. So I like added a comment and pinned it and was like, this is an advertisement. It wasn't even about that. It was about the content of what I was saying, about the SDS being an irritant and a detergent, which is accurate. It's scientifically accurate. And luckily, my supervisor got the email, pulled me in her office, and was like, what the hell is this? I was hiding my social media from her at the time, and I was like, okay, I've been doing this. I made a mistake. She was like, let's talk about it. And I explained the whole situation, and she was like, oh yeah, me and my whole family use SDS-free shampoos because it irritates our skin. Like, this is 100% real. And she's like, don't worry, this is just a crazy person on the internet trying to come for you. She's like, just delete the video and be over it. So I obviously deleted the video and everything was fine. But that was one of the most traumatic experiences of my professional life. Because I thought, and especially now that I've explained my path through science, I thought that I had effectively derailed my career. And I thought that I had screwed up. And it was so scary. And luckily everything was fine. And obviously I learned a lot from that about what to do and what not to do. But that is the most aggressive anyone's ever been with like trying to ruin my life. But I've also there's this notorious guy who's extreme anti-vaxxer. His name's Steve Kirsch. And my PhD research was on autism. And so like I understand very well, I've participated in this research. Autism is not linked to vaccines. So I talk about that online, and then all the, people freak out. And this Steve Kirsch guy, he did like a whole article about me on his Substack with like hundreds of thousands of followers, saying that he didn't even know, he thought I was a psychiatrist because I was in the Department of Psychiatry at Stanford, but I was doing neuroscience research, and he was saying that people should email me, and I got death threats, and it's just like a messy universe online. I think it brings out the worst in us.
Yeah. You said it's been 4.5 years that you've sort of been into this work. What was the transition point when you were like, okay, I'm getting through the clunky awkwardness of learning how to do this. I've decided I'm going to do social media. I'm going to learn it and become good at it. Can you talk about the transition to the first time that you saw, oh, I'm going to make some money from this, to now where I presume you could live off of that?
Yeah. So in the beginning, when I first started gaining traction, a lot of opportunities came my way that retrospectively were horrible opportunities. With all due respect to these groups and organizations, companies would reach out to me and say, hey, we have this product and we would love for you to promote it. So we'll send you the product in exchange for a video about it. And, I knew enough back then that I really have always been focused on trust and honesty on my platforms, especially given the distrust of science. I don't want to contribute to that by looking like a sellout, you know.
Yeah, yeah,
And so monetizing a science channel as a scientist is a really delicate and challenging situation because you don't want to appear untrustworthy. And so, you know, the early stages of learning to monetize was really all about me feeling out myself what I feel comfortable with. Like a company reaches out to me, hey, we have nootropics we want you to promote. You know, we
yeah.
say that they can enhance your cognition and all this. Okay, no, bullshit. I'm calling bullshit. I'm not going to promote this. I'm not even going to respond. But then I get in situations where, like, one of the first big sponsorships I did was Johnson and Johnson. They were like, "Hey, we'd love to just have you come to our campus in New Jersey and
Hmm.
just post about your experience." And I'm like, "Okay, this seems innocuous. I don't see any problem with doing that." But I still like deliberated a lot. Am I going to lose the trust of people? Am I going to lose followers?
Right.
And by the way, I should also add that the amount of money I've made purely from the platforms for views is
Yeah.
extremely small. Right now, I just went on Instagram. I have 500,000 plays in the last 2 weeks or something like that.
Hmm.
$0. I'm making not a penny. You don't get any view payments on
Right.
TikTok and Instagram like you do on YouTube. So all the money comes from sponsorships and partnerships and stuff. So it's been a process of one, obviously the opportunities have gotten better over time.
Hmm.
You know, like Johnson and Johnson was a huge leap where I was like, whoa, the fact that Johnson and Johnson, this massive corporation, knows I exist
Yeah.
is cool. And the fact that they're willing to pay me to just go to their campus and be like, hey, look how cool Johnson and Johnson campus is, rather than being like, you should get J&J's vaccine. That's a
Hmm.
very different story. So I've just always kind of worked really diligently to lay down and set boundaries. There's also challenges where I'll admit, you know, there are companies where I'm friends with the CEO and
Hmm.
it's a
Hmm.
company that I don't necessarily feel confident endorsing the science behind it, you know,
Right.
but I have a personal relationship with them. And so there's a lot of difficult situations that you get into,
Mm.
but ultimately I have found ways to monetize it and to make a living by just keeping my head strong in the direction that I want to go in and being trustworthy and stuff and partnering only with companies where there is scientific validity. And I mean, I could be making so much more money through social media if I didn't put up those filters, but then it's not even worth it. Like, what's the point? It's funny because when I was a full-time scientist at Stanford and I was doing this on the side,
Hmm.
it didn't really matter how much money I made through social media. I was only in it for the impact. Of
Yeah.
course, there were cool opportunities to make money, and that was always lovely. It was great to have a boost, especially because scientists don't get paid very much. But now, having left Stanford and my primary occupation is science communication, there's more pressure to make a living, but I'm still doing it for the same reasons of wanting to make an impact. And
Hmm.
so I'm just kind of always juggling this, like, you know, yeah, well, if I don't take this deal, then I'm not sure where my next check is going to come from. But if I take this deal, I might jeopardize my reputation. And so it's not even a deliberation. So that's just a unique challenge, like trying to stick true to your morals while also knowing that your livelihood is on the line. But luckily, there's enough reasonable opportunities that are scientifically justifiable
Hmm.
to not have to, like, I'm not pinching pennies and everything's fine.
Yeah.
It's just a
Yeah.
unique situation.
And I appreciate, you basically outlining this delicate balance of operating in any social media space, that there's the Mr. Beastification of content. It's something that I think about a lot as a content creator, just like, okay, well, would it be better to lean into algorithms and tapping into what is the number one monetizable form of content? I want to appreciate you knowing that it's probably easier to become that type of person on social media for the basic reasons of capitalism, right? It's just like take every
Yeah.
opportunity, get more money. And sadly, as we've seen with Mr. Beast, or even like Kanye West or Trump, is like leaning into controversy. You just fall up, right? Like picking the bad thing that makes
Yeah.
more people hate you may actually increase your reach on social media in turn, while undermining your credibility and integrity, but you're not necessarily
Yep.
immediately punished. So I want to take a moment to appreciate that. It's a really, really fine line to try to navigate.
Well,
And
thank you.
yeah, I'm sure it's hard.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that. And it is funny because, like, you don't really hear this spoken about often, but it is true. I could easily just sell out and all of a sudden decide to endorse all sorts of things that are ascientific
Hmm.
and fall upwards, like you said. I'm sure of it. I mean, not to put one person on blast, but he deserves it, honestly. There's a guy named Kevin Bass. He was MD PhD student at UPenn, posting on social media about COVID and, posting reliable science. Like, here's the updates on, COVID vaccines and whatever. And then, like, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, I don't know him personally, but I noticed his content just shifting towards bullshit.
Mm.
And then fast forward like a year, he's now like branding himself as I'm a doctor who was a sheep and I realized that I was a sheep and now I'm like woke. I'm actually anti-woke. I'm like waking up and I'm realizing that vaccines are terrible and COVID was made in a lab and Fauci should go to jail and basically just going all deep into like anti-science conspiracy theories, but presenting himself as a scientist or a doctor who formerly believed in all that stuff. And he's just gained followers and he's found an audience of people who love to hear that. Obviously you want to hear someone with expertise say something that no one else with expertise will say.
Yep.
But fortunately, he got kicked out of his MD PhD program, and I think his professional career is in shambles. And honestly, good. That's what should happen to people like that. You shouldn't be able to do that. And yeah, I take a great responsibility in keeping my content accurate and secure.
Yeah, and it feels like in the wild, wild west of the internet, there's not necessarily like real enforcement of holding folks accountable when they just become obvious sellouts or they're clearly corrupted, right? It's like very obvious corruption because it is a double-edged sword that you wield when having influence in this way. Here's one thing that I'm curious about in terms of the practice. Are you often like hoping or looking at other folks in social media who are, maybe they're similar, maybe they make similar content as almost, maybe I could reach out to this person to do a collaboration or a cross-promotion type thing, or even just, hey, could you give me some advice? Is that something that you think about very much? Do you have folks who are maybe more established in the influencing space that you like turn to?
Yeah, definitely. More so tips than shout outs. I've been fortunate to make a lot of friends in the social media space, ranging from financial influencer people to athletes and activists and all industries. And of course, many people in science and medicine. And yeah, there are plenty that I admire. It's just great to have these people as connections because we don't really do cross promotion, co posting. I have done that in the past. I've just found it to be too challenging because of the content style. You're going for 60 to 75-second videos to get two people to say meaningful things in the same video and have it appear natural that we're switching back and forth
Right.
is difficult to do unless you're like sit in the same room. And then it's like an interview, and those don't typally do as well as face to camera speaking videos,
Yep.
at least in my experience on my channels. So we don't do it as much of that, like direct collaborations, but more of sharing each other's content and just having conversations behind the scenes about new developments and hey, what the hell is going on with the algorithm lately? Like my video views are way down, or like this topic did really well, and just kind of existing together in this weird space has been really nice. And there are, of course, many people who are just extremely generous with their experience and wisdom and resources. People will just offer to help in great ways that are really nice, and I try and do the same. And yeah, it's like a community. Quietly though, we follow each other, we direct message.
Yeah.
Those are good friends to have.
I like that. I like this internet colleagues little support network. I think that's important. In my little documentary world in the South, we have started doing a conference basically to get together and actually talk and share space and share the process. I feel like that is really important for any type of creative work, is just at least bouncing off ideas and not feeling like you're having to deal with it in isolation. I want to shift into the practical advice section. Give me the essence from what you've learned now doing this for 4.5 years. What goes into like what you would say is like a great social media video? Like what are the key components?
So much to say here. So when you're talking about science on the internet, there are several keys. One is you have to be clear. That is first and foremost. That's just like an evergreen filter that goes on top of everything is clarity. I script everything. I want to make sure every word I choose is accurate and direct. But I think the other thing that I've slowly come into is that the videos that do really well are the ones that have a very strong and clear message. I'm sure this is also true in filmmaking. If you make a meandering documentary that doesn't really have like a punch or like a core message, it doesn't stick with people. It doesn't energize people.
Yep.
And so a lot of the videos that I make are sort of journal clubs where a new paper comes out and I'm like, okay, let me make a summary of this paper in 60 to 90 seconds or so. And if I just summarize the paper, like here's the introduction, here are the results, here's the discussion, and also here are the methods that they use. Like if I present it in the way that it's presented academically and scientifically, it doesn't resonate with people. But When I see an interesting scientific paper or read one and I want to make a video about it, my mind has gotten better over time at just immediately identifying the punchline or the storyline. And having that central thesis established from the beginning is so critical.
Hmm.
And it's important what that central thesis is because, for example, I made a video about this cool study where they had men sniff and women's tears and then play this financial game. And there's so many interesting things about this study that could have been the main theme. Like, for example, one of them could have been they collected women's tears by having them watch an emotional movie. And then as a control, they dripped saline down their cheeks. And like that could have been the punchline. It's like, how wild is it that in scientific studies, they're like doing these collection methods.
Right.
The punchline could have been the game that they had the men play. Why are they doing this study? The punchline could have been the result, which was that sniffing women's tears made men behave less aggressively.
Hmm.
But what I made the punchline about was the fact that there are biological, the study suggests at least, that there are biological systems built into us to empathize and relate and relent
Hmm.
our aggression when we smell someone's tears. And that's interesting. You would never expect olfaction, the sense of smell, to be involved in whether you lay off someone and stop being so aggressive because they start crying. But the study suggests that maybe it is. And so that was my punch. This is unexpected and it's cool and science shows that it's true.
Yep.
So building the message around that and getting that across is my central focus. And then I'm trying to start with an interesting hook. How do I get people to care about this topic? Within 3 seconds, tantalize them with something that they have to continue listening to because my job as a science communicator is not complete
Hmm.
or successful at all unless I can get people to commit to watching my whole video
Mm.
and learning something. So it's a very challenging combination of all these things of first off identifying the right papers to talk about the right topics, two, choosing the proper message, three, creating the proper framing, four, scripting the script in a way that's compelling and engaging, and five, being extremely clear throughout and scientifically accurate while condensing this massive multi-page scientific paper to a 60-second video.
Mm.
And all of those things together are something that I've just naturally gotten better at with practice.
Mm.
Not to mention, on top of that, being engaging yourself. Because I could write the best script and it could be the coolest study, and I could just be dry
Right.
and boring and look tired on screen.
Mm.
You have to pep up a bit. And that's also something that I had to learn over time.
You've just very obviously demonstrated yourself a storyteller because you just walked me through elements essential to storytelling. That's 100% it. Identifying relevant content that people want to hear, getting to what is the pithy point of it, and then presenting it such that people give a shit. That's the framing, that's the composition and elements of it. And then also being a performer. Man, that's it, 100%.
Interesting.
Are you familiar with the concept of thin slicing? Have you run into that term before?
No.
Oh, okay. So Malcolm Gladwell wrote this book a while back called Blink, which is about how when people become really good at something, like they're experts at art identification, they can look at a counterfeit in a second to be like, oh, that's a counterfeit. They don't exactly know why, right? It's like these subconscious processes that are actually firing all at once. And that's just why they can be like, nope, that's not good. And I mean, in some ways, what you've described to me is probably what you've developed in terms of being able to thin slice papers and just immediately be like, okay, with the point, at least to you, the point that's going to resonate most is XYZ. So it sounds like you've become very good at thin slicing. And I think this is a universal quality of a good storyteller. To me, it's not just can you take in information, but can you take in information and synthesize what's going to resonate with an audience?
Oh, I appreciate that compliment too.
Of course.
Thank you.
I see two camps of how you could offer advice for folks to engage with social media creation. One is for folks who are like, this is my career. I want to live off of it. And then there's the camp of probably more people who are like, I don't want to live off of it, but I can see it being additive. I can see it being, as you were describing, of just like, actually, it's supplementary. It's beneficial. It adds more. So maybe let's start with that. What's just some practical tips of, yes, this could help you practicing your presentation abilities, things that you gained from it when you were at that liminal transition, and maybe why folks should be considering adding this to their roster?
Well, first, I'll answer the second question, why people should be considering this. I think it's really important in modern society that scientists play a role in societal discourse. Scientists need to be just contributing in any way. And I really emphasize that that doesn't mean posting on TikTok every day and trying to get 1 million followers. When something crosses your phone that you know is scientifically invalid, put something on your Instagram story or on Facebook and just be like, hey, I noticed this and this is my field of expertise and it's not true. And here, let me clarify that. Micro influencing, in other words, being like a part of your community and just sharing your knowledge. That's really important. It doesn't always have to be like huge. I think everyone should do some of that. And that's also why I'm planning on teaching science communication at Stanford, because I think every graduate student should also learn, as they are learning to speak and write and perform and act like a scientist, they should also be learning how to communicate that back to the public. And that's not a formal part of most scientific training at this point. Now, as far as starting, what I really struggled with in the beginning was, how do I present myself? Filming yourself is really, really awkward because then you have to edit it. So you have to watch yourself back, and it's like, oh, this is like the grossest thing I've ever seen. It's me, and I'm talking, and I'm looking at the camera, and I'm speaking. It's awful. So I think what you need to do, and this is just like also a general tip, is talk about things that you're passionate about. And maybe that's things that you know the most about or things that you care the most about. I found that I still struggle with this, where I really want to talk about a topic because I think it's interesting to the public, but if my heart's not really in it, I'm making the video because I think people will want to see it, but I don't really care. And those videos, they don't really do that well. Whereas the videos that I'm super passionate about the research and I'm really stoked about what the scientific findings suggest, those videos do so much better, even if they're things people wouldn't normally be interested in, because that enthusiasm carries attention. It commands attention. And I think when you're a scientist and you study whatever the hell you study how frogs jump between leaves, something that no one's ever really thought about that much, but you know this so deeply that you care about it so much, when you start talking about it and you light up on camera,
Yeah.
people are going to start caring about how frogs jump between leaves because you do. That's my like number one piece of advice. And also, if you're going to do it for you. Don't do it for views or influence. People probably doubt this because of the way I have developed my career at this point. But truly, when I started on social media, it was not for financial gain or personal gain. I actually felt that it was, like I described, it was maybe going to hurt me, but I was doing it for the impact because I wanted to reach people and educate people. And I think that's why it did so well, is because it was so organic. And I see a lot of the time now, people starting out, they start out in this very like commercial, artificial kind of way where like these are very genuine people, but they just don't know how to present themselves on camera. And they feel that they need to blend into the social media environment of being very artificial. But I think authenticity really carries you further. And be yourself and just do it for fun. That will probably work better than studying and trying to figure out what exactly you should do. But if you are interested in understanding the algorithm, at least on TikTok, I did conduct a study where I analyzed the data on 150 of my videos and looking at what influences video performance from the algorithm standpoint, how people engage with different types of content. And I did publish that in a scientific journal. It's a peer-reviewed study, and it's on my website if you want to find it. I keep all my papers, no paywalls, on my website for people to access. You could see clearly by looking at it, like what influences video performance on TikTok, at least my videos.
Yeah, I want to like fold this into the next piece, specifically when you're talking about how basically harnessing our own passions and our own genuine interests is going to pull out the greatest enthusiasm. In short form video content, that seems critical, right? Because if your heart's not in it, people can tell, which is fascinating from like even just like a neuroscience perspective of like, why is that? How can we tell when people are bullshitting versus when they're just authentic? But would your advice hold true let me walk you through like a scenario. If I'm taking your advice, I'm like a up and coming and I want to do social media and that's my job. Would you say, okay, well, just do the types of content that actually interest you and have another job until things take off?
Yeah, absolutely. Social media is far too volatile to jump in and immediately use it as your profession. Way too volatile. The algorithms are unpredictable, and I've been doing this for 4.5 years. I understand. I've literally, like I said, I've studied these algorithms, and I still can't predict what's going to happen. I have 700,000 something followers on TikTok. I'll post a video on TikTok, and it'll get 800 views. Not 800,000, not 8,000, 800 views, which is like a tiny percentage of my following.
Wow.
Why that happens? I don't know. Probably because the video is not engaging enough. The platforms are getting more and more competitive.
Yeah.
You have to compete to be presented to even your own followers in their feed. So to jump right in and rely on this as a career would be a bad idea. And also something I share a lot is that if I had to start over today, if it was April 13th, 2020, when I posted my first video, and I had to reproduce the trajectory I've gone on, even knowing what I know now, I'm not sure I could reproduce it. It's so unpredictable, and we are governed by the algorithmic gods, and you don't know how they're going to act, and they're constantly changing. Yeah, definitely do it on the side and try to enjoy it too. It really can be so fun and pleasant, but when you put the pressure of I need to make a living or I need to grow followers or this or that,
Yeah.
then it starts to become really terrible and really high pressure, and you're trying to keep up with it, and you always have to feed the channels, and
Right.
it can be really fun or it can be really terrible, and it depends on your attitude.
So don't quit your day job. I again, like, I gotta just appreciate the fact that you're really walking through the really complex situation. For one, yes, it's an increasingly competitive space to be in. The fact that the algorithms shift, it's not necessarily a supportive environment for the content creators, right? So dependent on
No.
just ultimately what drives engagement with the app. That is the sinister issue of all social medias. It's all about just how do we get more people to stay on this app for longer. So I appreciate you
Right.
being really honest about that. As you were building into the profession, well, one, were you ever like, okay, I actually want to focus on growth specifically because I'm seeing that this is working? You've already talked at length about improving the content of your videos, but were there more traditional things that you did, such as like, well, I'm going to pay for promotions, or I'm going to go for boosts, or I'm going to do research and try to make content specifically because of so-and-so's blog post on it? Like, have you spent money in some of these more traditional ways just to grow your own following? Or are you strictly just, if I make a post and it goes bad, I leave it, and then I make another post and I try to do better, and that's it?
The latter, for sure. All organic. I've never paid for promotion or anything like that. There's a lot of times where companies, they try to swindle you, and they're like, oh, you make a video for us, we'll pay you for it, and then we'll promote it on your channels, so you'll get all these organic followers and stuff. And it's like, let's be real, nobody's following anyone from an advertisement. They're swiping away immediately, and if they follow you already, they might unfollow you because they've seen you in an advertisement.
Yep.
I've never done any inorganic growth attempts. I should clarify, as much as I've always been focused on impact, I also have been focused on growth because my impact scales with growth.
Yep.
And so the furthest I've gone to enhance my impact is tinkering and experimenting with different styles of content and different types of hooks. I have found that what works really well for me is, like, I did this on accident where I was super excited about this one study, and it's an incredible paper, and the findings are ridiculous. And I was like, this paper's crazy. Like, I started the video like really enthusiastic and kind of sensationalizing it a bit. Like, this is gonna blow your mind. And that video did so well. And then a few months later, I tried that again with a different video, and it did really well. And I don't like doing that because I could just start every single video like that if I want to, but then it just becomes, it's the same thing over and over again. And how can you trust when I'm really about to share something wild versus another video that I'm just starting with the same hook? So yeah, I mean, when my videos flop, I just let them be. Sometimes if I'm looking back and I find a video from like 2 years ago
Yeah.
that was really good but didn't do well, I'll just throw it back up today and be like, well, let's see what happens. People forget. Nobody who, like, I don't even remember what I said in the video 2 years ago. People don't remember. So yeah, I mean, you could recycle a little bit. It's funny. You learn a lot by just doing it and figuring out what works and what doesn't.
I appreciate how practical your approach seems to be. And also cautious. The fact that the journey started with, I'm just going to do it, see what happens, got lucky, then didn't get lucky for a long time, and then had my whole life flash before my eyes being threatened by some stranger on the internet. And then also, I didn't say this before, but the fact that you had support from faculty and colleagues throughout your journey, to me, that sounds fucking rare. To be honest, like, I'm surprised. I am surprised that you were supported. I'm glad that you were supported by that, because I know plenty of folks that's not how it would go, who would just lose their positions, you may have, not been able to graduate because of all that. I'm really glad that you had that support. I think that is a more progressive mindset for like these people that you were working with and that you were studying under. What do you wish people knew about your process? You've shared a lot, but is there anything else that you just constantly run into that, like, you don't understand? It's not that simple.
I think everything is not that simple. Although, in my experience, when I talk to potential science communicators, like PhD students, they're very intimidated by it. So I think they do appreciate how complicated it is. But get to the point where you identify a topic, you script it, you film it, you edit it. Okay, editing is a challenge. It's a skill you have to learn. You have to get the cuts right, and you have to learn a video editing software. Okay, now you've edited it. Oh, well, what about, maybe we should add on-screen captions so that people can read the text. Okay, now how do we do that? Fine, you got that. Now you're ready to post. well, what do I caption it? Does the caption matter? If I put the wrong caption, will people swipe away? Does the time of day that I post it matter? Does it matter if I add music? Does it matter if I add any like effects on screen or anything like that? There's so many questions that come up that you can really only learn what to do through experience and practice. And everyone's content is different too. Some people love putting like really dramatic music behind their videos. Some people don't.
Mm.
And I experiment and I bounce around. I think one of my challenges and problems is that I'm not consistent. Like I change the appearance of my on-screen captions and I sometimes use hashtags and sometimes don't, and sometimes use music and sometimes don't. I think there's just a lot of decision making that goes into it. I guess my advice is don't let that hold you back and don't overthink it. Just shoot.
Don't be stuck in choice paralysis. Just try it.
Yeah.
I like the Ben approach to social media content. That's good.
My approach is fuck around and find out.
That's right.
Basically.
That's right. And have a full
Which
job.
Yeah, which is another way of saying experiment and observe the results.
Very scientific. Look at that. That's the scientific method. Sick, dude. I think there's a lot of questions in the storytelling space around like, well, what is social media? Like, it's scary, it's overwhelming, and I really appreciate how like honest and transparent you are with the process. Because I've had similar reservations about like, do I want to bother? It's a lot of work to do it, and if it's not a monetization stream for folks who are doing filmmaking or doing podcasting, then is it worth all the effort, right? And so again, this is just an episode of me saying like, great job, dude. Like, it's awesome.
Thank you.
What's something that gives you hope for the future?
Well, sometimes it's hard to find hope for the future. Things happen that are not always what you want them to be, but I think the fact that I am able to do what I do, and not just in the context of me, but in the context of society, gives me a lot of hope because we have this information ecosystem where anybody can speak, anybody can be amplified, any claim can go viral, and anybody can judge information based on however they feel. And I think what gives me hope for the future is that since I started on social media till now, I have seen a dramatic shift in the way scientists and doctors, medical doctors, approach social media. I've seen more and more getting on there, posting, sharing content, sharing ideas, responding to cultural events, debunking videos with misinformation. I'm starting to see that the voice of science and medicine, the voices are being represented in these discussion forums, these worldwide discussion forums. And I think that gives me hope because the world is moving online and discussions are moving online. And if science fails to move online, then it will be left behind and it'll be forgotten, really, and it won't have a seat at the table. So it gives me hope that we have the ability to share science and all this educational material through the internet where people are listening. If you take all the bad stuff out of it, the misinformation and the whatever, I really do believe that TikTok and like recommendation algorithms are the most conducive format for doing science communication ever created because you can now reach people who are interested in science but didn't know they are interested in science.
Yeah.
Thanks to these recommendation algorithms for the first time ever. 50 years ago, how would you get people to know about science? Well, you would either host a lecture and see who shows up. Okay, that's a self-selection bias. Whoever shows up is already interested and cares. If you put a TV show on, okay, once again, self-selection bias. Whoever's going to sit there and watch it cares. How do you reach people who don't care, who don't trust? It's by having it appear in front of them and giving them the option to watch it. And when that information appears in a format that they're not used to, where it's like me in a t-shirt in my room, just like talking, and not like a scientist, in a lab coat and like a Pfizer logo, and it's just a guy talking, they may be more willing to embrace it. And so that gives me a great deal of hope. I think that maybe with the right approach, science can re-embed itself into a place of trust in society.
Beautiful. Wow. You're reminding me as one of the biggest influences in my life, like when I decided to like get my shit together and be like, actually, wait, I love science and I love learning and I'm going to kind of turn things around. It was watching the series Cosmos by Carl Sagan. To me, it was just like, holy fucking shit, I'm so fascinated about the universe now. And it's because it was like, how is it interesting? How is it engaging? What are things that are just genuinely cool? Also, the man was charismatic as fuck. And like, obviously that had a big influence. I mean, like the turtlenecks, like killing it. But I mean, it's so interesting to think in this day and age where as you're saying, like the bigger academic complexes, they're starting to recognize, oh yeah, the future is now and we actually have to embrace this. We can't ignore it because it actually just gets worse. But I remember Carl Sagan being like controversial at the time, right? There were a lot of peers who were like, you're not doing science when you're making these videos. Why are you making these videos? You're not a real scientist. And I wonder if you feel the same pressures sometimes too, this like imposter, well, I'm not doing science anymore.
I did feel that at the beginning. That's exactly the fear I had when I first posted on TikTok and was like, I don't want to be the TikTok scientist. Am I really even a scientist? Can people take my work seriously if I'm simultaneously posting on TikTok? And I'll admit, even way before, years before I got into this, seeing people, Neil deGrasse Tyson, for example, and being like, same thing. He's not a real scientist. All love to Neil deGrasse Tyson, but I have no idea what he does outside of podcasting. I don't know if he does any research. I don't think he does. But there are people who like run academic labs and publish papers and also like publish books and do TV shows and stuff. And growing up or like getting into science early on, I was like, no, I don't consider those real scientists because they're not in the lab hardcore.
Yeah.
And that's just completely wrong. When I decided to not pursue a traditional faculty academic position, but instead devote myself to communicating science, that was a very long and painful and strenuous decision to make. And that came up a lot. What is my identity if I do this? Who am I if I'm not a researcher in the lab?
Yep.
And what was all this work for if I don't end up actually committing myself to science in the lab? So it's something I struggled with, but now being on the other side of it, where I haven't been inside of a lab for like over a year, I couldn't care less. Like I feel that I'm committing myself to something that is impactful and I'm doing it for reasons that I know why and I feel strongly about. And I get to see the impact every day. I post a video and it gets views, or we do this podcast and you get to see people reply and share their thoughts, and you don't get that in science. And moreover, science isn't built to support that model because the publications, the work that we are doing does not get publicized. And so, at least not sufficiently, I believe.
Yeah.
And so without people like me or people doing the types of things that I do, how does science reach the public? And so I actually, not to get overly dramatic or ridiculous about it, but I feel that what I'm doing is a big and important part of the scientific enterprise. And I don't mean my work specifically, but this type of work, this field of science communication is a really important and functional element of the scientific enterprise to make sure that people relate to and learn from the scientific findings that are being done quietly. So that's why I'm so supportive of more people doing this. And I don't care if people don't think I'm a scientist anymore. I don't know if I think I'm a scientist anymore. I struggle with what to call myself. I've published over 20 papers. I've worked in the lab for over a decade, but I'm not in the lab right now. And so I tend to call myself a scientist by training. But yeah, it doesn't bother me. I'm not really affected by it anymore.
One thing that was very surprising when I interviewed Holden Thorpe, who's current editor-in-chief of Science, pretty big journal, he had a very progressive view. He said any person that engages in like the scientific process in any profession, not in a lab exclusively, is a scientist. Which also, to your point, they have really recognized the importance of actually reaching the public through science communication. Apparently, they have 200 different journalists and media entities that they partner with anytime they do like a print release, which is, every 2 weeks, to elevate papers that are published. Probably one of the reasons it's so damn competitive. Okay, then we're both talk monsters. You have too much good stuff to say. You killed it. I feel hopeful based on what you said. That brings this story to a close. I hope you enjoyed the episode, and we would love your input. If you have an idea, like a future guest or a new segment, send us a message, podcast@etherealfilms.org, or you can leave us a comment on the Substack. The show is made to help other creatives just like myself, so if you want to support us, tell another friend to start listening. It really makes a difference. Real Perspective is produced in Hillsborough, North Carolina at Ethereal Films. Episodes are co-produced by Ava Richardson-Dodd, and Sammy Bauer is our head of cat wrangling. I'm Eli, and that was A Real Perspective.